A weird, wild, and wonderful week 14 is almost in the books. We do have a doubleheader on Monday Night Football that we're excited about, and I'm sure there's lots of people out there that have fantasy matches coming down to the wire on Monday Night Football. There's lots, Shawn, of options that people will be using in those 4 teams, so excited to see what happens in those contests. We'll be talking a little bit about how our main event is going over the course of that time. If it is a chance on Monday night, Shawn talked with Ben on Stealing Bananas about some of the kind of ramifications or potential scenarios for him and Ben's team, along with the ship chasing guys. So lots to get into, lots of interesting play, lots of good play, lots of terrible play, lots of questionable plays, lots to talk about, Shawn. And that's what's fun when we get to a Monday scenario like this. There is no shortage of talking points. We're going to start off with Sunday Night Football in a moment, but Shawn, Week 14, the main event that I talked about. I don't usually do this. I sent Shawn an email yesterday after the first slate of games. The Detroit Lions, who we're going to finish today's show with, really struggled against the Bears defense, which has really improved in recent weeks. And obviously we've talked in the past about the home road splits, but also Jared Goff being outdoors doesn't usually lead to great things. But a tough day for the Lions. Shawn, I sent you an email that said, I don't think today's going to be our day. And I kind of was ready to emotionally check out of that final. Thankfully, things in the second half and through Sunday Night Football have kind of fell in our favor. And it's now projected to be within 1 point either way. It is going to be an excruciating Monday Night Football. And I know as well from Stealing Bananas that you and Ben have a team, thanks to running into a buzzsaw at both kicker and defense, that is in a very similar situation. So Shawn Siegele may have no fingernails left after Monday Night Football. How are you feeling so far in week 14?
Good, because it should come down to Monday Night Football, right? You want that last game, something to root for, edge of your seat the entire time. And to say it was a roller coaster on Sunday is putting it mildly. Colm, you sent a capitulatory.
Shawn, roller coasters are usually enjoyable or fun. You know, there's an adrenaline rush.
Well, but Colm, we had given up on this one.
Oh, we had checked out.
The balance here, right? Where Ben and I last night, we were talking about how Ben said 50. I never saw it to that extent, although it may have been. We were certainly favored by more than 35 at one point. And we're still favored now, but in some ways we're in trouble. I'm having a hard time processing it, not from a grieving perspective, because again, lots can still happen. We could still win, but just like trying to fathom the fact that our opponents put up 46 points through kicker and defense. 46 points. Anyway,
has to be a record. Has to be a record, I think.
We've blown the advantage in that one. But Colm, you and I were down by about 30 in the projections earlier because our Detroit Lions decided to play one of the worst games ever. We talk about the home road splits, and I mean, you like the fact that your team plays most of its games at home, and that is one of the things you're kind of targeting in fantasy football. The flip side of it is that, this shouldn't be a thing like, you think back to when you're little kids and you're too rowdy and your mom's like, go outside. And, it shouldn't be something where you tell your mom's like, no, Mom, we can't. Like, our indoor-outdoor splits are too significant to go outside and play.
It's too cool.
Yeah. To say that was not impressive is putting it mildly. And yet, somehow, despite our guys not even really doing that much, we did. So, long story short, it's going to be a relatively low-scoring game. But Colm, by halftime of Monday Night Football, we were actually projected to win by like 6 or 7. The second half didn't go as well for us, with Jake Ferguson putting up some points. As you mentioned, it's now a toss-up. Colm, if the game ended with the projection of 125.6 for us, 124.9 for our opponents, I would take that.
I would certainly take it, but the stress levels are not going to be ideal in this one. Shawn, those Detroit Lions, it's Jared Goff, Amon-Ra, and Sam Laporta who have carried us towards this playoff final. They put up a grand total of 20.85 points between them.
Which isn't even a good score from your kicker or defense.
No.
Those 3 guys together.
Not
well, it would be a good score, but it's not a great score from your kicker or defense.
It would be a great score, but not in the context of how some of the defenses did score this week. But yeah, we'll talk about those a little bit later, but we're going to get into Sunday Night Football scenario. So for people who want to track that, we have Jason Sanders, the kicker for the Miami Dolphins, and our opponent, who are OT listeners. So, you know, I've been in contact with them. It was a stressful day for them as well with how their team performed, both some positive and some that, you know, that had issues. They had Cameron Dicker, for example, a kicker who did just get the 1 point off the PAT. So some scenarios that helped us get back in so we can empathize with that side. So we'll see how it shakes out on Monday Night Football. But they have DeAndre Hopkins and the Green Bay Packers defense. So we currently have a 13-point lead. But Shawn, the projections, as you mentioned, have it. I mentioned a point. It's basically 0.69 of a point is the split there. So we'll see how that works out. And
I'm just on record right now as saying I'm not scared of DeAndre Hopkins. I am terrified of the Green Bay Packers defense.
Okay. I'm going to say that I will leave that in the show, as much as when you said that, I was wanting to cut it out, that you are not afraid. Shawn, if Hopkins gets 2 touchdowns tonight, I don't know how we're going to start.
Well, he's only projected to score 13.4. So it's not like he has a huge hurdle to get over to beat that. And yet I'm projecting what Mike Evans did yesterday, less than 2 for DeAndre Hopkins tonight. Colm, we did a big show
Shawn, I can't believe this.
Friday, talking about the way that we pick the lineups and the different RotoViz tools that you can use going through it. One of the things, the Miami Dolphins have been very hot in pass defense as of late, but DeAndre Hopkins does have that 57 in the passing matchup rater. That is slightly above average there. The tool, I think, expects him to score around his normal level, which is about 13 points a game this year. One of the things you're kind of looking at with this game and with the projection is that, especially because the Titans force teams to pass and then don't defend the pass at all, you could have the Dolphins really run away with this game, and then you have a lot of second half garbage time. And this is, one of the points that you made to me. Hopkins could get shut down during the real course of the game and then score a bunch late. The balancing part of that is just Will Levis has been so bad. This could be a game where a team really struggles to pick up first downs. And if they end up going a lot late and the Dolphins kick field goals as opposed to what they have done, one of the risks with Jason Sanders is the Dolphins haven't kicked a bunch of field goals.
They've been too
efficient.
They've
gone for it a lot down, in the red zone. You'd love to see a game, in our particular situation, a game like what we got from the Bengals yesterday, where they kick field goals late, the Jets kick field goals late, the Dallas Cowboys are kicking, billion-yard field goals throughout the game and more late. So it sets up as a possibility there where our kicker could run it up, and yet I think there's a little bit less likelihood of that with the Dolphins. What you need is for them to shut him down throughout the entire game. One of the things to track, and one of the reasons that I've been a little bit nervous about Jalen Waddle, who is somebody not just for the main event, but looking across best ball teams for tonight. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where a player had as much leverage as Jalen Waddle has across the board for my teams this evening. The mild concern there, and again, if you have any actual lineup decisions as opposed to being locked into, whatever your best plays are at this point, the weather could play a little bit of a role. The wind could play a role in this game. Will Levis doesn't need any extra degree of difficulty in terms of getting it to his receivers. If weather ends up being a factor tonight, you could get some really low scores for certainly the Titans, perhaps the Dolphins as well. You'd love for this to be one of these games, and we do see this occasionally where one team, for whatever reason, and usually it's because they're better, doesn't get limited as much by the weather, and on the other side of that game, you have a team that simply can't overcome it. Pretty similar to what we had with Jets-Texans yesterday. You wouldn't have expected the Jets to be the team that was able to work through that. And yet, certainly with all of the injuries that the Texans sustained, including very sadly to Stroud at the very end, that's when the game is already over. But there's a limit to the number of players you can have hurt. We talked before the season about how the lack of weapons for Stroud could be a huge problem for him. And then his guys came out and played extremely well. Tank Dell has been a revelation. Nico Collins has put up all of these crazy yards per route numbers. I think anybody listening to the show knows, obviously, that Dell was out for the season coming into this game, and then Collins goes out early. Noah Brown fails to make a long catch. It would have been, an almost impossible catch. Stroud was having a little bit of trouble holding the ball, which, again, the wet ball is going to give people trouble. We talked about it on Friday's show when we discussed Fields versus Stroud and recommended Fields. And so I feel good about that. Hopefully, that has helped a listener perhaps win their league, or, in many cases, you're going to be trying to push into the playoffs. Hopefully it helped them make the playoffs. I am sad for Stroud and the Texans that this game ended the way it did. Certainly we weren't expecting quite such a catastrophic outcome, and a sad outcome, sort of pending the health of a couple of these Texans guys. You certainly don't want their season to get derailed at this point. You'd love for them to bounce back next week.
Yeah, I agree. And I mentioned we were going to start with Sunday Night Football, but Shawn has had us on the Jets. So I think we continue on that theme, Shawn. And obviously you did mention the conversation we had on Friday's show. And I have to say, as we did that show, and I mentioned it was a great example of using the tools, Shawn had pulled up a secondary page and was looking through the matchups. And obviously that pulled up the New York Jets, whose defense have been just destroying quarterback performances over the course of the season, and set that up. So giving Shawn all the credit for that final push towards Fields on that decision, and we'll potentially get to the Fields part later in the show. But CJ Stroud did struggle before that injury, 10 of 23, 91 yards. Singletary gets in the end zone, gets his day, finished pretty strong. But on the receiving side of things, Shawn, obviously 11 completions, Brevin Jordan with 3 receptions for 35 leading the way. So nothing really happening there. But I guess the keynote in this for me is, again, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson show not necessarily that the situation's not going to matter for them, but that the talent is just so high that if they can get this situation fixed heading in, obviously we want to think about the next couple of weeks, and hopefully they win people, including ourselves, lots of money in some of these best ball contests and season-long formats. But, with the right quarterback and with things going in the right direction, the upside of both of those players is just, it's impressed me a lot how they have continued to be able to do it in what has been a carousel at quarterback in a lot of difficult situations. Zach Wilson, though, played kind of like he knew what's the worst that's going to happen. I'm going to get benched again. So he decided he was going to go out there and attack it a little bit. So he got 301 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. He did like 4 sacks for 33 yards. But Breece Hall, Shawn, 10 for 40 on the ground. The ground game not really existent here. We get Dalvin Cook 7 for 13. In total, it was 26 for 79 for them. Xavier Gibson did have a rushing touchdown, 1 carry for 9 yards. But Garrett Wilson, 14 targets, 9 receptions, 108. It's just a shame that he's in this particular situation. It's a little bit like what we've seen with Drake London and his performance this week. Feels like just a different situation, and these guys are just in a completely different stratosphere. Then we had Breece Hall, 8 receptions on 9 targets for 86 yards and a touchdown. Looking electric. Randall Cobb does get in the end zone, 1 target, 1 reception, 15 yards. Breece Hall, though, Shawn, we've mentioned a couple of times on shows, has continued to get used in the passing game, which I think that is the way that I would like to see him used based on how unsuccessful the running game has been for the Jets. But he has hit 22% target share in each of the last 4 games, which is phenomenal to see as we head towards these playoffs. One thing I do want to mention, the first half of this Jets game, which did finish 30-6 in favor of the Jets. First half, Shawn, punt, 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 punt. End of half. Amazing stuff. Great work from both the Jets and the Texans to be able to pull that off. At halftime, the box scores were not looking great, Shawn. But we got Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, which a lot of those best ball teams, and including one, me and Shawn have been watching a team over the last couple of weeks in the Superflex contest that has been sneaking its way back in, and we kind of really needed everyone to hit that was on that roster this week, Shawn, and boy, did they hit. They put up their best week of the season. But great to see the 2 young Jets have a pretty nice week here.
It really was. And a lot of fun things in this game. Now, the fact that you just mentioned, I mean, the weather does play a role, but you have two defenses that the Jets side elite, the Texans side really rising. D'Amico Ryans has done a fantastic job with this, just overall roster. Now, you see a game here where they just get routed by the New York Jets, and you're like, they still have a ways to go. But it is a reminder of the type of variance that you're going to get in some of these NFL matchups, especially when teams have extreme strengths and maybe extreme weaknesses. You throw the weather in, and that's another complicating factor where a handful of...
Like, they lose Nico Collins pretty early in this game to calf injury, so down their two wide receivers that have been taking them along this season as well.
But it's such a good reminder of humility, too, from a commentary perspective. And I'm in no way, shape, or form saying that Zach Wilson hasn't been a disaster or that the Jets shouldn't have tried different things. And you also do get that just vague sense still that they tried some of the worst possible quarterbacks in order to create a contrast where Zach Wilson would look decent.
Imagine if they had Joe Flacco, Shawn. Could you imagine that?
Well, I mean, that would be pretty nice. But the thing that you want to mention here, as opposed to focus on the conspiracy theory that I just bring up, it's almost the case where you're like, I complained about Zach Wilson all season, but it was the couple of weeks where you get Tim Boyle that really crushed the Garrett Wilson numbers and kept some of those. Now, the last start for Wilson, I think, was a disaster there as well. Anyway, the silver lining is that Wilson does come to play, and he breaks the string. I think it was something like 16 straight games of Jets quarterbacks going under 300 yards. He throws for a couple of touchdowns. There was a magnificent play in this game where he drops back, has the rush instantly right in his face. He peels off of that, beats the initial rusher, which again, the athleticism, the raw athleticism from Zach Wilson and the arm strength. I mean, these are the reasons, in addition to some production that he got in a way that now looks pretty fraudulent. But the athleticism here for Wilson to beat that play, spin out of it, maintain his balance, then launch a pass down the field to Garrett Wilson, who comes flying out of nowhere to grab that pass, some run after the catch. You see the dynamism of a Garrett Wilson on that play. You saw it throughout the game. You mentioned it. He looked just unstoppable. On his 14 targets, he catches 9. He has a play at the sideline that goes incomplete where, I mean, he gives one of the greatest efforts you'll ever see, both from an effort perspective, but also just the grace of making the reception at the perfect diagonal to give himself a chance to have the toes down, and has both toes down. The ball hits his fingers as the toes drag for the last split second. It's ruled incomplete. It was one of those where, as Gene Steratore is talking about it, he notes that you watch it in real time and it doesn't even look close. Now, one of the things that I thought as I watched it was that, not that I thought that was an accurate way to describe it, but you are thinking to yourself, okay, that also looked like such perfection that there is this tiny chance that he actually did make that catch. And I hope they at least show a replay. They do. There's no way that you're going to be able to call that a catch on the field. There's also no way you're going to be able to overturn it, because really it just is contact with the fingers as the toes are dragging. And contact with the fingers is not the full catch, obviously, but it was an amazing play. Now, the contrast is he also has a bad drop in this game. He has sort of an out of nowhere false start where, all 10 of his teammates are there ready for the play, and he starts sprinting down the field and looks around like, why is no one else participating? So it wasn't a flawless game, but I mean, again, this is something where when we get into drafts next season and you're going to be looking at that first round, you're going to be having to decide which running backs you feel comfortable with, because there's going to be this group of 4, 5, 6 wide receivers that are such clear difference makers. You're going to have those guys, and it's probably going to be a deal. I mean, Ben and I show in the second half of last week that I really enjoyed was what we hit on, what we missed on, talked about structure, talked about players. Really enjoyed that discussion. One of the things we did talk about is how wide receiver, and then hitting on some of these talented backs like a Breece Hall, really did seem to be the way to attack 2023. Obviously, once we get into 2024, we have the ADP. We're seeing, which talents appear to be dropping, which guys are overpriced. We'll have a better sense of how we want to play that structurally next year. But it's very possible, again, I would think, that something like an upside down approach, a wide receiver, and then hitting some running backs is going to be the way to do it. Maybe it'll be back to a full-fledged zero RB. That's also a possibility. But when you're looking at those guys early and then you're trying to decide, which running backs do I feel comfortable with in the second half of round one, when you get into the 106, the 107, the 108, the 109, how early are you going to start considering Garrett Wilson if you think that he's got a QB who can get the job done? Because what he has done with Zach Wilson has really been pretty crazy. And if you told me after watching that game yesterday that Garrett Wilson finishes as the overall flex number one, so basically the most valuable player in all of fantasy football in 2024, that wouldn't remotely surprise me. You're going to have to get over guys like a Christian McCaffrey, a Tyreek Hill, a CeeDee Lamb. If Justin Jefferson is back with a viable quarterback, a Justin Jefferson, you're going to have to get back over guys who are extraordinary. You're going to have to get over a Jamar Chase. Garrett Wilson having a 2,000-yard receiving season in the next 2 or 3 years doesn't even seem like a bold prediction right now when you watch the way that he's playing. And if anything, Breece Hall looks even better.
Shawn, the only thing I can imagine there is that the listeners are listening to this at this moment in time and they have just got extremely hyped and they're just wondering how many times they can get Garrett Wilson on their fantasy teams in 2024. 2,000 yards, I always say some of Shawn's predictions can be on the long range end, but yeah, I'm excited. And I'll be drafting a lot of them. I can assure you that.
The Breece Hall note really quickly. You mentioned the target share. He does go 886-1 in this one. I think sometimes that listeners probably feel like, and very legitimate complaint, that we talk about Travis Etienne and his receiving role, the lack of it too much. But you watch a game here, and also we've criticized Nathaniel Hackett a ton. And I think that the flip side of that is you definitely have to give credit where it's deserved. I was surprised that the Texans didn't react to some of the things that they're doing, slipping Hall out of the backfield in this game, especially when, attacking down the field, the only thing that Wilson really can do is go to Garrett Wilson. There aren't other receivers on this team that you have to worry about at all, and yet they left Breece uncovered over and over and over. You do watch the Jaguars games. You see how they try and leak Etienne out every once in a while, and usually it draws the defender. One of the things that was very disappointing if you were playing Christian McCaffrey, and this was a tough one, Colm, because not surprisingly, when you're in the fantasy finals, you are going to get a decent amount of overlap because there are only so many league winners. The team that you and I were playing against featured a bunch of players that I was playing in other main event finals. And so you're like, just don't thread the needle so that we lose them all, right? In the ones that we were playing Christian McCaffrey as opposed to playing against Christian McCaffrey, as you and I were doing, it was very frustrating to see that the Seahawks were very aware of where McCaffrey was coming out of the backfield yesterday. So he was much more limited as a receiver than he is in many games. But the Jets are consistently able to get the ball to Breece Hall in space, which is just so huge. You look at this game, maybe Dalvin Cook is completely washed. You look at what he did last season, and it's kind of overstated how bad he was. He was still a perfectly fine runner last year. That can disappear very quickly. Obviously, a lot of discussion of Austin Eckler and where he has been. But Cook goes 7 for 13 on the ground in this game. Breece Hall is better, but when you have an offensive line that doesn't block and a quarterback who doesn't demand any type of respect, if you want to get your star running back involved in a way that makes a difference in the game, it has to be out of the backfield. Breece Hall is just an incredible receiver. I don't think that you can allow him as the opposing defense to do what the Texans did in this game, but the other part of that is that Hackett designed this in a very impressive fashion. The Jaguars are going to continue to lose until they get Travis Etienne the ball in space. A fantastic job by the Jets getting their playmakers involved. I think that as DeMeco Ryans and the Texans, you've got to be pretty disappointed that you let the only guys that they have, now granted, very, very good players, but you let those guys beat you. Force Randall Cobb, who has the touchdown, force some of these other. Tyler Conklin, a good game. Jeremy Ruckert had a fantastic catch in this game. So even though it's lower volume, the tight ends came through. There were other nice plays. Again, a lot of credit to the Jets.
You mentioned there Christian McCaffrey and the Seahawks kind of knowing where he was. He only got one target, which is a season low, but goes for 1 for 8 there. Breaks off a 72-yard run to kick things off, but then gets to basically the goal line. Jordan Mason takes that one in. But Shawn, what the Seahawks decided to do was to not allow Christian McCaffrey to catch the ball with Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle. You go right ahead. You get as much as you can handle there. But we're not going to talk in depth about that game on today's show. We might get to it on the Tuesday show. But Shawn, Deebo Samuel is a unicorn. There was talk a couple of years ago about who was going to be the next Deebo Samuel. I don't know if there'll ever be another one of what he can do in terms of the multiple ways that he can be used. There's players who can do similar, but not the combination of what he does. But we will get to that on the Tuesday edition of the podcast. But Shawn, Dallas Cowboys 33, Philadelphia Eagles 13. We did talk quite a few different times at kind of the quarter pole of the season, a few other times about the Cowboys and were they legit? Was it that they played some bad teams? But they are legit, and they are now 10-3. They are tied on record with both the 49ers and the Eagles at 10-3. They are 7-0 at home. Dak Prescott kind of quite comfortable in this performance. I felt he didn't really have to push it too much. The team was 24-6 up at halftime, and outside of when he got sacked for the fumble and obviously returned for a touchdown, they kind of handled the Eagles on both sides of the ball. And this one, running game, Tony Pollard gets 16 carries for 59. We get Rico Dowdle 12 for 46 and a touchdown coming his way. Jake Ferguson, 8 targets, 5 for 72, showing that he is an explosive playmaker when he's getting some of those dump-off passes. Takes one 32 yards in this one. CeeDee Lamb, 10 targets, 6 receptions, 71 and 1. And I do think part of that is, he did have a drop as well in this one, but the nature of how the game was going, they didn't have to force it as much to him. I think if you're in a closer contest or trailing, he is getting just peppered over and over and over again. Like, he was open a multitude of times that they didn't go to him. Michael Gallup, 3 for 48 and a touchdown. Brandon Cooks, 2 for 37. And then the other one, Tony Pollard, Shawn gets 8 targets and 7 receptions, 37 yards. But I guess the big talking point is Aubrey just bombing those kicks over and over again throughout this contest. And he did obviously have a massive night in terms of putting up fantasy points. Shawn, on 2 of the kickoffs this night, he hit the crossbar. So 75 yards away, he hit the crossbar. And with how he was kicking, do you think he was just hitting the crossbar from those kickoffs for fun, for a challenge?
You see those guys hit it sometimes. I mean, the kickers have massive legs. Having a kicker is a big weapon, right? And we always joke and make fun of the teams that use a 3rd or a 4th round pick on a kicker. And part of that is simply going back to, I haven't spent any time doing work on kicker evaluation and how predictive some of that stuff is. If you can get a kicker who's a weapon in the 3rd or 4th round, and like that's locked in, that the guy's actually going to come through and do those same things in the NFL, which is something I don't know, then I think it would be worth it, right? Because you do have some of these teams who are consistently going on 4th and a difficult conversion, a distance that probably you're not going to make, because it doesn't make sense to. And when Andy Reid does this, it's endlessly frustrating. But when you're in that 35 to 42 area, it just doesn't make that much sense to punt it. But you have to feel like your kicker can hit it. Now, I think Harrison Butker can. And so, again, unless the weather is terrible, then you really want him doing that as opposed to Reid punting. But to have a guy who can knock these down is a massive weapon. You're obviously not going to hit them all. Ben was joking with me, I don't know if it was on the show or after, because obviously we spent some time rehashing how that all worked out. But at certain points in this game, it appeared that the Cowboys were just like kicking for the pure joy of it, kicking for the fun of watching their guy hit these.
Practicing for the playoffs, Shawn.
Yeah, I mean, when you're lining up for a 60-yard field goal early in the game, it's almost a lack of respect for your opponent, right? Because you're like, we don't care if we miss and they get the ball here at midfield. But again, the flip side of it is just you think your guy can hit that. And if you can, it's a huge weapon. And I do think that it matters for the Cowboys. It's something here now where they are emerging as something of a super team. you look at where the actual weakness is, and it's probably on the defensive side of the ball when they have faced opponents who, have some quarterback play, then they have struggled, but they come back and they actually dramatically slow the Philadelphia Eagles in this game. You look at what Jalen Hurts is doing, and you think back to a couple weeks where the Chiefs have a game where they control the Eagles, should have won, blow that game. That looks like an even worse loss for Kansas City now that the Eagles have just been absolutely manhandled by both the 49ers and the Cowboys in this one. They look lost on the offensive side, which is certainly never something that you would have thought at this point that you'd be saying about a Jalen Hurts, with a DeAndre Swift, with an A.J. Brown, and a Devontae Smith. Smith gets the 10 targets in this game, only goes 5 for 73, takes some big hits as he's trying to come down with the ball. Hurts barely misses him on what would have been a long touchdown, but also I think that Smith has got to get his arms all the way out there, full extension, and make that catch. You need your teammates to come up absolutely huge when the team is struggling, and Smith can make those plays. His athleticism, he's a little guy, right? But he has the explosiveness, not just in a straight line, but as a leaper. And so you want to see him make that play. They need him with A.J. Brown. It was a really quiet 9 for 94 from Brown in this game. The Eagles just don't know what they want to do from a play calling perspective. They're lost on so many of these possessions. I think they'll get that back. They've got a good coaching staff. They obviously have elite players. You have to give the Cowboys some credit here. Obviously, they've been tougher in this game at home than they were when they played the Eagles on the road a few weeks ago. Again, looking at that from a defensive perspective. I also want to just throw a quick note in here that Matt Irby wrote a fantastic article on Mike McCarthy and the Dallas Cowboys. I think I've mentioned it a couple times, but it continues to, when I watch these games, sort of blow me away how much he foreshadowed this season. It was certainly one of those articles that affected the way I was looking at the Cowboys. We were going to be targeting CeeDee Lamb at that 1-2 range, probably regardless, but it made me feel a lot more comfortable with that. It was something where when we got this team that was Amon-Ra and Lamb as our main event, you just have so much excitement for being able to put those two guys together. They've really come through this season, except for this sort of final week with Amon-Ra. But you look at the two there. As we were looking at this game, Colm, we were thinking that if CeeDee Lamb can more or less cover Dak Prescott, then not that we're going to win, but you're going to like our chances. And he more or less does that. Again, that dropped pass sort of early in the second half. Slight chance it goes for a long touchdown. It would have been about a 30-yard gain. That could end up being the difference, but obviously you don't make all of those. He looked good. Prescott looked good. We would have loved for Jake Ferguson to be a little bit less involved. We don't have much exposure there, and he has had an excellent season. He does end up leading the Cowboys with the 72 receiving yards, but an impressive game here. It was also illustrative of an difficult decision that our opponents had, where they can go with Prescott and Ferguson, try and counterbalance and counterattack Lamb on our side. They could also have gone with Lamar Jackson and Isaiah Likely maybe in the flex instead of A.T. Higgins. That one is interesting because you can kind of sell the entire Cowboys passing game at least to an extent. Now, sell it only from the perspective of Lamar Jackson has the potential to have a huge game. If they had gone with Jackson, we would have lost. We still may lose, obviously, but now we have a toss-up on Monday night. What did you think of this Baltimore Ravens, Los Angeles Rams game that, it turned into a shootout?
It did. And just one more note before we get to that. The Eagles, obviously, you mentioned that they've run into the Cowboys. They've run into the 49ers. Before that, they played the Bills. Before that, they played the Chiefs. Before that, they played the Cowboys. So they beat the Cowboys, Chiefs, and Bills, lose pretty badly here to the 49ers and the Cowboys. But they do now have the Giants, the Cardinals, and the Giants again. Or sorry, the Seahawks, the Giants, and then the Cardinals over this playoff stretch. So they have a lot here to be able to get right. And you mentioned that they have, it's kind of question. They're kind of. I feel like they're almost questioning what they're doing at the moment. And when we look at this again, the run game wasn't working for them overly well. They were behind, but we've talked long about DeAndre Swift, Shawn, and his strength of schedule in terms of who he had to face. He has cleared that defensive side now. So I think we'll see the Eagles get right over this next couple of weeks here. But that Rams game, Shawn, against the Ravens, 37-31. This was one that I called out as a potential, lower scoring game, potentially, if they wanted to run behind Kyren Williams. And obviously we know how the Ravens like to run the ball. And you mentioned the decision our opponents had. Obviously that was weather concerns as well heading into this game. So for this game to have the weather concerns, to have the potential matchup concerns, and for the way it played out was very, very interesting. Kyren Williams has 114 rushing yards on 25 carries in this one. Also has 3 receptions for -1 yard. Demarcus Robinson, Shawn, tied Cooper Kupp in the lead for targets in this. Both of them had 10 targets with 3 for 46 and 1 touchdown for Robinson. Davis Allen gets a touchdown, 4 for 50 on 5 targets. Puka Nacua, 8 targets, 5 receptions, 84 yards. I was very impressed with some of the plays that he was making, and likewise with Kupp. I think this was Kupp's best performance in quite some time. 10 targets, 8 receptions, 115 yards, and a touchdown. Matthew Stafford had some incredible throws in this game, but he finishes 23 of 41, 294, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. But I think, Shawn, just an interesting game. I thought, play by play, the Rams were really impressing me, but in terms of some of the deeper, the explosive plays, I thought the Baltimore Ravens did just about enough, and they were kind of a little bit fortunate. Looked like there was a block in the back penalty that could have took that, walk-off return touchdown off the board. But Lamar Jackson, 316 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 11 for 70 on the ground. Keaton Mitchell and Gus Edwards kind of splitting the work the rest of the way, 9 for 54 for Mitchell. Gus Edwards, 6 for 15. Mitchell, again, looking explosive, does have a long of 27 in this one. Shawn, somebody I want to mention that we may have been quite unkind to maybe over the course of the season, Odell Beckham. I do think there is parts of Odell Beckham's game that are looking much sharper now than they did at any point of the season, but he does have 10 targets. It feels like they are trying to force him the ball, 4 receptions, 97 yards, and a touchdown. I did see a quote from him on the touchdown that he did say that he ran the wrong route on the touchdown, which obviously got the touchdown, but probably better not to be running the wrong route. And we have seen that all season long with some of the issues with the Ravens in terms of and we've kind of seen issues obviously with the Chiefs as well, mental mistakes, issues with running the right plays and so on. Isaiah Likely, who you mentioned a moment ago, 7 targets, 5 receptions, 83 yards and a touchdown, one of those being a 54-yard touchdown. And Zay Flowers, who was having another one, Shawn, of the games that we kind of worry about, the kind of quieter game. And then at the end, he came up big with the octopus. He gets the touchdown. He gets a 2-point conversion, 10 targets, 6 receptions, 60 yards, and a touchdown for him. So Flowers continues to kind of have that feeling of, oh, this is not a good start this week. It's not a good start this week. It's not a good start. Oh, what a great decision I started Flowers this week. He has that kind of feeling. How are you feeling about this particular game? Feelings on the combined 27 targets going the way to OBJ, Likely, and Flowers. And then, of course, on the other side, I guess we get 10 targets to DeMarcus Robinson, which I would question, but I thought Cooper Kupp and Nacua looked fantastic as well. There was a lot of strong wide receiver performances in this one.
Yeah, so we went into a lot of depth on Rashee Rice versus Zay Flowers for how we would make that decision, how we were working through that ahead of this game. You brought Brandon Ayuk up as sort of a stealth bench candidate, which was interesting. And if we had benched him, we would have another 2.5 points. And given, again, that this is a pure toss-up, those 2.5 points might make the difference. I kind of keep going back to where I would love to have an extra starter in this roster because Rashee Rice ends up getting to the point total we needed. Initially, when Zay Flowers goes off at the end of this game, I'm thinking, well, we made the wrong choice, but we're getting blown out to the extent that it won't actually matter. It ended up not mattering because Rashee Rice scored an identical total.
And they are all...
I really want to get Zay Flowers into the lineup, but I don't know how we would do it. This is a game where you don't know how Rice is going to play, right? When you're watching Flowers and you're thinking if Rice has a terrible game, that'll make it a bad decision. But it's also something where that we can then play Flowers during the sprint because we want to win $1 million with this team. Obviously, it's a long shot, but you want to have a great lineup that you can put out there. If Flowers has a great game, it gives you another option. So you're in the kind of this weird headspace where you're rooting to be wrong because it gives you another elite player to put out there and potentially win the whole thing.
And the other way, Shawn, just to look at that, those guys come in so close in terms of like there's 2.4 points between all three of them in terms of the points they got this week. This was the week it felt like if you were going to slot them into the lineup, because Trey McBride is going to be coming back off the bye for the sprint, as you mentioned there, and he's likely to come in as a second flex option. But we also probably need to consider over the course of the week, you know, the Lions situation. And
yeah, are you ready to punitively bench all the Lions?
I don't think we can do that because our backup quarterback is Joshua Dobbs, who will no longer be starting. And
so if we're going to start Jared Goff, we have to go ahead and bet on the other guys.
We'll see what we do, but obviously that's kind of tongue in cheek. But Sam Laporta this week had his struggles, but we have lots of depth, which is nice heading into that stretch. But on Brandon Ayuk as well, you know, the fumble that he has in this game, brilliant defensive play, almost a case that Ayuk doesn't know that the player is trying to make the play. But I do think there's a chance on that play as well. If he doesn't fumble that, he may take that to the end zone. So, you know, one play here or there, and we're looking at this in a different direction. And, you know, I think we made the right calls through the process. And that's the thing that can be hard to decide is the process right? And, you know, again, we talked through the process that we did, and that's the same process we'll use this coming week. You'll always make an informed decision and take in the information, but it's very easily that we're looking at that Zay Flowers game without even the 2-point conversion, and then it's only a 0.4 difference to him and Ayuk. Yeah,
I mean, it'd be difficult to bench a player like Ayuk, who is a borderline wide receiver 1.
And it has been so consistent. He's had the one spike week, but every other week he is, you know, you want those 15 to 20 points in your lineup every single week. And that's kind of how we've managed to be in with a shot in this particular game. Is, you know, Etienne has 17 points, Williams has 18 points, Lamb has 19 points, Rice has 19 points, and then Ayuk has 17.5 points. But it's those kind of consistent points, if you don't have the spike weeks, that will potentially give you an opportunity. And he is very consistent from that point of view.
And when you think about the sprint here, there is the potential for him to have one of these games where
he could have the Deebo Samuel game from this week. You know, he could have that Deebo Samuel game next week or the week after in the sprint. It's very, very possible.
Well, he's probably not going to score a long receiving touchdown and get, you know, multiple goal line carries.
No, but he could get two deep touchdowns, which would be more valuable than the.
Yeah, I mean, there are a variety of ways you can get to. The thing with him that I think is just so terrifying is that when you do have those other 3 stars in any individual game, there is potential for his floor to be very low. Now, with Rashee Rice and Zay Flowers, you also have the potential for a low floor. But because they are the guys, you look at this game. I mean, Zay Flowers' game was weird, right? Because he has a bad drop halfway through where he makes very little effort to get down and make the catch on, you know, a poor pass from Lamar Jackson. We kind of, you know, discussed like, tactically, how would you think about this game from the opponent's perspective? They were underdogs in this contest, not by so much that you would start doing suboptimal things to try and make it back up. Because one of the things you do hear discussed sometimes when people are looking at a head-to-head contest that they're not favored in is that they'll start making some decisions where it's like, if this happens and then this happens and then this happens, then it will allow us to have enough leverage and score enough points. Like, this isn't a 50-team, you know, DFS.
You're not trying to win the BBM4 here.
Right. I mean, it's only one other team, and there are lots of other things that can go wrong with that team. If you're only a mild underdog, you just need to play your best score. So I think what our opponents did was the right choice. And you watch this game, and you're like, yeah, I mean, Lamar Jackson is just one of the most fun players in football. I was watching it with a family member who said, you know, look, I mean, he's just so different even from the other rushing quarterbacks. When he gets
one of the
out
best
there moving,
athletes in the NFL ever.
I mean, if he were a running back, he would be a top 10 running back in the NFL.
The 2-point conversion to Flowers in this game, the way he like just moves in the pocket and, you know, he kind of makes a juke to miss one guy, and he's under such pressure, but the quickness of his feet. I know I joked earlier about Joe Flacco, but you know, he's in the pocket, and if you can get to him, you're getting him. Lamar Jackson, the way he can move around and kind of juke around, but just a spectacular player. I don't think he's getting the credit he deserves for what he's doing this season.
Well, in part because there are also so many bad throws. And you look at this game where he's 24 for 43, and a lot of those 19 incomplete passes, you're just left scratching your head. And so with Lamar Jackson, you have the extremely high highs, the really low lows. You mentioned the thing with Odell Beckham. The touchdown is funny because Beckham is basically like looking around for the ball and trying to figure out like how he's going to get back to it. Now, part of that, if it's running the wrong route, he's like, okay, well, I got wide open doing what I did. Is there any chance that the ball is going to be thrown in my vicinity? So he gets back. He's able to make that catch. You had the broken coverage on the Isaiah Likely long touchdown. And people are going to look at some of those things and say that they're not predictive or they're lucky or what have you. The fantasy managers who maybe don't go with the Likely, they're like, well, I mean, you take that play away and he's not playable. But teams like the Ravens and quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson, who both can extend plays and have a massive arm, are much more likely to benefit from broken plays than all of the bad quarterbacks. Now, a lot of that goes without saying, but I just want to point out the fact that the stars are going to get these types of explosive plays where maybe you're saying, oh, well, the explanation is just a broken defense, in ways that other teams are not, and those explosive plays matter. So we can't eliminate those plays. It is a situation here where it feels like the Rams dominated this game when you think back through the different Baltimore possessions, but the explosiveness from Lamar Jackson and a few of the strange decisions that the Rams made allowed Baltimore to win. You mentioned Demarcus Robinson. Demarcus Robinson, for anybody who doesn't remember, was a longtime member of the Kansas City Chiefs. He was a very, very poor player. One of the reasons that the Chiefs, had to reload with this new wave of receivers who, frankly, also are struggling. They're poor. But for Demarcus Robinson to get 10 targets in this game is an egregious misuse of resources. Now, you mentioned all of the fantastic throws that Matthew Stafford made. He also kind of works in this type of throw that I think baffles Sean McVay and does create some of these situations where Kyren Williams gets 25 touches. Now, Williams has been very, very good, so he's earned some of those in his own right. But you think back to how McVay, even in their Super Bowl run with Stafford, tried to manage him at different times because of the bad throws. There is a play late in this game where Matthew Stafford throws the ball up to Demarcus Robinson in the corner of the end zone when he's double covered. You're talking about someone who probably shouldn't be in the NFL, double covered, and you're going to throw the ball up to him. And Robinson has to make the play knocking the ball away. Yeah. That's one of the worst throws that you will ever see because there's no upside, and it should be an end zone pick. Yeah, there is a few of those in every game with Stafford, but I kind of would take that with the aggressiveness, though. I kind of would almost take that. I mentioned the Odell Beckham touchdown. There is another play in this where he makes a great adjustment to the ball. I didn't hear him after the game saying that he ran the wrong right there, but the commentary is rightly saying how good he is done to adjust because he's kind of facing over the wrong shoulder and still makes a catch. But I don't know. Did he go the wrong way? I don't know. But this was, I thought, one of his better performances, but there's some question marks still in there. Shawn, moving on to Baker Mayfield would tell you that he will frequently not run the routes at the right depth and location, and Odell Beckham will tell you that Baker Mayfield is not a good quarterback.
We're not going to get to the Mayfield performance here, but got the job done to Kate Otten at the end this week, so we'll get to that on the next show as well. But the Bears, the Lions, touched on this at the start, Shawn. Justin Fields started this game really, really sharp. The one thing that's good is to see him back using his legs, since his injury, his 12 carries for 58 yards and a rushing touchdown. In terms of the last 3 games since he came back, he had 18, 12, and 12 rush attempts. So we're getting that upside, even if we're not seeing everything happening in the passing game. But in the passing game, he does go 223 yards, 1 touchdown, does take 3 sacks for 29 yards. But DJ Moore looks great in this, 10 targets, 6 receptions, 68, and 1 touchdown. The touchdown being a 38-yard touchdown on 4th down, which I think is an egregious error, obviously, from the Lions. I don't think they're going to run a play there on that 4th down situation. I think they're trying to get them to jump offside. The Lions jump offside. You have a free shot to DJ Moore one-on-one on the outside. It's a nice throw. It's a nice catch. Kind of poor error there from the Lions side of things. One of the plays, Shawn, I thought was, I like to mention some creative plays and extremely well-designed plays. And that's the rushing touchdown for DJ Moore. He has a 16-yard rushing touchdown. nice play. He's in as the Wildcat, sprints it out to the side. Justin Fields out at wide receiver. There's plays that you want teams to not run, but I thought this was extremely well executed by the Chicago Bears. On the other side, you talked with Ben a little bit about this on Seed and Bananas, but we may as well get into it as the repercussions for the main event team. Jared Goff really struggled in this one, 20 of 35, 161, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, 4 sacks for 34 yards in this game. Again, this is the debate. We get the Lions wanting to run the ball. Between Gibbs and Montgomery, there's 21 combined rushes for 132 yards. Gibbs gets into the end zone, has a long run of 36 in this game, looks electric. The explosion when he takes a step is there to see, kind of similar to what we're seeing with Breece Hall and those sort of situations. But Shawn, Josh Reynolds leads in receiving, 3 for 44 and a touchdown for him. Laporta, Amon-Ra, completely out of sorts. Jared Goff out of sorts. One of the worst performances, I think, of Amon-Ra's career so far, and there hasn't been many of those that have been on the below average side of things. Part of it on Goff, part of it on him. But this, it's spread around between so many receivers in the passing game. We're getting, more targets to Khalif Raymond. We get Brock Wright in there. We're only getting the 1 target for Jameson Williams, which probably should be more than that, but we get 3 targets to David Montgomery. We get Donovan Peoples-Jones in the mix. The Lions were just all over the place in this one, and I got the feeling quite early in it when they were, with some of the plays they're running, the commentary team in this one gushing over some of the stuff they're trying to do in the first quarter when they're 7 points behind. But they've lined Sam Laporta up as a fullback in this. They rush him for 4 yards. Felt like they maybe took the Bears a little bit for granted in this, and we're trying to put some stuff potentially even on tape for other teams to have to try and adjust for. But the Bears put their foot on the Lions' throat here and got a convincing win. The big talking points have to be DJ Moore, Justin Fields. We've kind of, I think, talked down the Lions enough. They will bounce back here. But Cole Kmet also 7 targets, 5 receptions, 66 yards on tight end premium formats. Very, very valuable. Has a 41-yard reception among those. Thoughts on the Bears? The DJ Moore, Justin Fields connection has been amazing when they've both been out there. 21.3 PPR points per game for DJ Moore in those situations.
Yeah, he looks really good. And the main thing I was thinking, again, and we have harped on this, but just you really feel like the Carolina Panthers organization made just a cascade of mistakes in terms of trying to put their roster together. Because
should they just fold the organization?
Just DJ Moore is so good. You can't be in a situation where you trade DJ Moore and then a couple months later you're like, our only problem is we don't have a number 1 wide receiver. You had to make that trade in a way that you didn't give up more. And so one way or another, you have to build out your organization. And you can say, well, or you can just do what the Texans did and have guys like Nico Collins take a step forward, hit on someone, to an extent, like a Noah Brown, a cheap reclamation type of project, or an out of nowhere, middle of his career emerge type of player. But in addition to the other things with that, again, you have Mingo as opposed to Dell. You can't miss structurally. You can't miss at the QB and miss at the wide receiver. You can't miss on everything. But right. And it comes back to the foundation of it didn't make sense. DJ Moore, anytime that he has had anybody at all who can get the ball out, and it's a reminder of just how bad his quarterbacks are, because even in a good game here with Justin Fields, I mean, you're not playing with a star passer. You're playing with a quarterback who could become probably not a Lamar Jackson or a Jalen Hurts, but some slightly lesser version of that. If you have a strong coaching staff and you have good pieces around him, you're starting to now see that. I mean, the Chicago Bears in no way, shape, or form looked overmatched in this game. If anything, they looked like far and away the best team. This isn't a game where like a handful of fluky plays determined it for the Bears. This was a game from the first snap to the last snap. The Bears were the far better team. Yeah. Right. And Justin Fields is a key part of that, as you're mentioning. DJ Moore also a key part of it. And I mean, again, you can't allow yourself to give away players of that level. But also, it's just a lot of fun to watch DJ Moore in a viable offense. Certainly, there are scenarios where he could be even more dynamic than this. But, I mean, you're getting the rushing touchdown. You love to see that. Something we've seen a little bit with like a CeeDee Lamb at points this year. And people talk about Deebo Samuel. I mean, DJ Moore could be a little bit of that for the Bears without having to compete with all of those other stars. The ceiling, I mean, the floor is going to always be relatively low when you have Justin Fields, probably throwing somewhat inaccurately, probably making some bad reads, but also rushing a bunch. I mean, there are 12 carries that go to him in this game. Now, that's counterbalanced to an extent by the fact that the running backs are not actually getting carries. And so, if the running backs are not going to carry a lot, then it will work, right? But the ceiling in any individual game for DJ Moore is now very, very high because you have so much to contend with a Justin Fields, and you have the arm strength that, I mean, you can hit him anywhere. The chances of him having multiple long plays to have multiple splash touchdowns at any given game, I mean, right now Moore is up there at the very top of the NFL. I mean, not with those top 4 or 5 guys, but I mean, right below that, I mean, DJ Moore is now back to the level he should have always been at, which is a true star.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is he was somebody who for years and years we were constantly making sure we loaded up on all our rosters. And I still have a number of dynasty rosters that DJ Moore is a key piece of, and obviously that's been fantastic over the last couple of weeks, but not as much of him in season-long in best ball as I would like to have at this point, because I do think he could be a key player over these final weeks. A few final notes, Shawn, as we get ready to wrap up the podcast today. We obviously mentioned the Lions and how much they struggled. The Bears defense over the last couple of weeks, particularly since week 11, they made the trade to get Montez Sweat from the Washington Commanders. He has 3.5 sacks in those 5 games. That's since NFL week 9, but they're pretty much a top 5 defense in that particular stretch. So like we talked about with the Jets, there's going to be teams coming up here against the Bears. Maybe if you look at their season-long kind of numbers, mightn't be as impressive, but they are really ramping up in terms of what they've been able to do in that point of time. They have 3+ takeaways in 3 straight games. They also have 11 takeaways since NFL week 11. So they are really stepping up here in terms of their performance on defense as well. So going to be interesting to see how this division shapes up, I guess. If the Packers were to win on Monday Night Football with the Bears getting this one, the Lions obviously taking the loss. It'll be interesting to track that. I still think the Lions heavily favored there. The last note that I didn't get to mention either on the Ravens game is Zay Flowers and his games without Mark Andrews this season, obviously with the injury. 33.1% target share in those and 20.3 PPR points. And those, I haven't split those out, Shawn, in terms of how many of those points have come in the last 5 minutes of the fourth quarter each week, but still averaging 20.3 points in that time. That will do us for this edition of the show. We are obviously coming up to the holidays. Shawn mentioned this on Stealing Bananas. Perfect time to get yourself a gift, get yourself signed up over at RotoViz.com, or even get one for a friend or family member, get them signed up. RotoViz.com, the perfect holiday gift. But you can use the code RVRadio2023 at checkout. Get yourself a 10% discount off a RotoViz NFL Pass. Good luck to everyone in Monday Night Football with the 2 games. There's lots of scenarios that could play out on this particular Monday night. We're obviously getting Saturday Night Football this coming week as well. So lots of changes to the schedule. Going to be interesting to watch along. Best of luck. Hopefully whatever you need happens. But until we are back, my name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at @OverToMarlin. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out Shawn's work up on RotoViz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.